Part 1. The first hatchling vanished on a windless night when the city of Hearthspire lay wrapped in the dull red glow of the volcanic ridge. No alarms sounded. No scorch marks stained the stone courtyards. The nursery caves remained undisturbed, their braziers burning low and steady. By morning, however, one cradle carved from obsidian stood empty. The attendants insisted the little dragon must have wandered into a neighboring chamber, perhaps chasing a moth or drifting ember. Hatchlings were known for reckless curiosity. Yet when the second disappeared 3 nights later, unease spread like a crack through cooling glass. Guards doubled their patrols along the basalt walls. Scouts traced every tunnel leading beyond the district. Whispers gathered in corners where smoke curled thickest, and the word theft was spoken with rising dread. Weeks passed and the count climbed. 5 gone, then 7. Entire clutches reduced to silent stone nests. The elders convened beneath the grand arch, their massive forms casting trembling shadows across molten channels that flowed beneath iron grates. Accusations flickered hotter than the magma below. Some blamed rival broods seeking leverage in old territorial disputes. Others suspected human settlements creeping ever closer to dragon lands. A few muttered about darker forces, creatures that preyed on innocence to weaken the future generation. Yet none could explain the absence of struggle. No broken gates, no scent of fear lingering in the air. It was as though the younglings had stepped willingly into an unseen doorway. Tension bled into every corner of Hearthspire. Training grounds fell silent, instructors too distracted to focus on aerial drills. Markets thinned as parents kept their remaining hatchlings close, wings wrapped protectively around small, restless bodies. The usual chorus of shrill chirps and playful sparks diminished, replaced by anxious murmurs and watchful eyes scanning every rooftop. Even the sky seemed to hang lower, heavy with suspicion. When dragons passed above the human quarter, their shadows lingered longer than before, and merchants below felt the weight of scrutiny. Far from the grand arch, near the cobbled streets where human craftsmen plied quieter trades, stood a narrow barber shop wedged between a cooper's shed and a bakery fragrant with warm bread. Its sign, painted with a simple razor and comb, creaked gently in the breeze. The shop belonged to Elias Rowan, a broad-shouldered man with weathered hands and an easy patience that steadied even the most nervous clients. He rose before dawn each day, swept ash from the doorstep, and brewed strong tea before sharpening his blades to a polished gleam. His livelihood depended on precision and trust. Soldiers sat before him unarmed. Merchants closed their eyes as he trimmed close along the throat. Over time, he had even earned the rare business of dragons who required careful shaping around horns or delicate cleaning of scale edges near the jaw. Elias heard of the disappearances in fragments. A worried father whose beard he trimmed mentioned sleepless nights. A scaled courier muttered about expanding patrol routes, while Elias clipped stray fibers from a wing joint. The barber listened without offering speculation. He understood the weight of fear but also knew how quickly rumor sharpened into hostility. He kept his focus on steady work, humming old travel songs beneath his breath as scissors whispered through hair. Yet subtle signs brushed against his awareness. On certain evenings, when he extinguished the lamps and prepared to lock the back door, he noticed faint scratches near the threshold. Not deep gouges, but light markings etched into wood, as though made by small claws testing entry. Once, he discovered a curl of silvery down caught against a crate of towels. Another time, a lingering warmth radiated from the hearth long after embers should have cooled. He considered the possibility of stray animals seeking shelter from chill winds drifting down the ridge. Hearthspire's nights had grown colder lately, volcanic currents shifting unpredictably. One particularly quiet afternoon, Elias finished trimming the hair of an elderly dragon scholar who complained softly about lost archives and rising distrust. After the scholar departed, the shop settled into stillness broken only by the crackle of the hearth and distant street chatter. Elias wiped his tools clean, lined them in careful order, and allowed himself a rare moment of rest in the worn leather chair near the fire. The bakery's ovens next door released a gentle wave of heat through the shared brick wall, filling the room with comforting warmth. Outside, clouds thickened, promising rain by nightfall. He did not know that beyond the alley, hidden beneath stacked barrels and discarded crates, small shapes waited. Tiny wings folded tightly. Bright eyes watched the narrow window glowing with lamplight. Drawn by warmth and the steady rhythm of a human presence untouched by accusation, they crept closer each evening, guided not by cunning but by instinctive yearning for safety. The nursery caves, once lively, had grown tense and echoing with adult worry. The open skies carried patrols and suspicion. But this modest shop radiated something simpler. A quiet hearth, a heartbeat slow and unthreatening. As rain began to fall, tapping softly against the glass, Elias rose to secure the shutters. He paused when he sensed a shift in the air, subtle yet unmistakable. A flicker of movement brushed the edge of his vision near the back door. He stepped toward it carefully, hand resting on the latch. When he opened it a fraction, cool night air slipped inside along with the faintest scent of ash and damp stone. For a moment he saw nothing but darkness. Then two luminous eyes blinked up at him from the alley floor. Instead of shouting, Elias crouched slowly. The tiny dragon before him trembled, not in aggression but in exhaustion. Rain dotted its small horns, and its wings drooped heavily against slick cobblestones. Behind it, more shapes shifted hesitantly. The barber understood then that whatever mystery haunted Hearthspire had not taken the hatchlings by force. They had fled something less visible yet deeply felt, an atmosphere thick with fear. Without speaking, Elias stepped aside and left the door open. Warmth spilled outward like an invitation. One by one, the baby dragons crossed the threshold, tiny claws clicking softly on wooden planks. The first settled near the hearth with a relieved sigh, curling into a tight coil. Others followed, blinking in drowsy gratitude. And in that quiet barbershop, while rain washed the city clean outside, the missing hatchlings finally slept. Morning did not arrive gently. Elias woke to the unfamiliar sensation of weight rising and falling across his chest, accompanied by the faint crackle of embers flaring brighter than usual. For a brief, confused second, he wondered if he had fallen asleep too close to the hearth. Then something small shifted beneath his chin and released a soft, contented trill. He opened his eyes slowly, for baby dragons were draped across him like living blankets. One silver-scaled hatchling lay curled over his shoulder, its tiny claws hooked carefully into the fabric of his shirt without piercing skin. Another, deep crimson with darker speckles along its spine, was sprawled across his ribs, wings spread loosely as if claiming territory. A third had tucked itself beneath his arm, snout pressed against his heartbeat. The smallest, pale as morning frost, rested directly on his chest, rising and falling with each steady breath he took. Elias did not move. Years of holding razors to vulnerable throats had taught him control beyond instinct. Panic would startle them. Sudden motion might trigger defensive flame. So he lay still, listening to the quiet rhythm of their breathing, feeling the gentle warmth soaking through layers of cloth. The shop smelled faintly of ash and cinnamon drifting from the bakery next door. Outside, distant bells signaled the opening of market stalls. The dragons were not injured. He could see that immediately. Their scales shone healthy beneath lamplight. No chains marked their limbs. No bruises lined their fragile wings. What clung to them was not harm, but fatigue. Carefully, inch by inch, Elias shifted upright, supporting the smallest hatchling with one hand so it would not slide. The movement stirred them. Bright eyes blinked open. Instead of hissing or retreating, the silver one merely yawned, revealing tiny, harmless fangs and nestled closer. "You chose an odd inn," Elias murmured quietly. The crimson hatchling chirped in response, a soft clicking sound more curious than threatening. He rose slowly from the chair, expecting them to scatter. They did not. Two remained clinging to his shirt. The smallest climbed higher, settling at the base of his neck as though it had always belonged there. The frost-colored one fluttered briefly before landing on the wooden counter beside a jar of combs. Elias studied them with thoughtful eyes. "You're the missing ones," he said softly, understanding settling into place like a final puzzle piece. He moved to close the back door and secure the shutters. If the elders found them here without explanation, assumptions would ignite faster than oil. Dragons grieving lost young were not known for patience. Yet hiding the truth would only worsen matters. He needed time, just enough to understand why they had come. The shop bell rang unexpectedly. Elias froze. Through the front window, shadows stretched long and vast, far larger than any human figure. The cobblestones outside trembled under immense weight. A low rumble vibrated through the glass panes. They had tracked the hatchlings. The baby dragons reacted instantly, but not as he feared. None bolted toward escape. Instead, they clustered closer to him. The crimson one scrambled up his arm and perched on his shoulder. The smallest burrowed against his collarbone. Even the frost-colored hatchling leapt from the counter and pressed against his leg. They were not afraid of him. They were afraid of being taken away. Elias inhaled deeply and walked toward the door. He opened it before anyone could shatter it from the outside. The street had filled with dragons. Towering forms blocked the morning sun. Scales shimmered in hues of bronze, charcoal, sapphire, and gold. Wings folded tight against muscular frames. Yet the tension in the air crackled like a coming storm. At their center stood a massive matriarch, her horns sweeping back like twin crescents carved from molten metal. Her eyes locked onto the hatchlings clinging to the human barber. Silence fell across the district. "You," she said, her voice controlled but heavy with restrained fury. "Return them." Elias stepped fully into the doorway so all could see clearly. "They came on their own," he answered evenly. A ripple of disbelief moved through the gathered dragons. "Impossible," growled a broad-shouldered elder to the left. "Hatchlings do not abandon their brood." The smallest dragon shifted against Elias's chest and released a soft whine. The matriarch's gaze flickered at the sound. Something in her expression changed, not weakness, but confusion. Elias did not bow, nor did he challenge. He simply spoke as he would to any client seated in his chair. "They were cold and tired. Your district has not felt peaceful in weeks." Murmurs followed that statement. Wings flexed. Tails twitched against stone. "You accuse us?" another demanded. "I observe," Elias replied calmly. Children sense tension more sharply than adults. They feel fear even when it is unspoken. The crimson hatchling lifted its head and let out a soft trill, almost pleading. The sound cut through pride like a blade. The matriarch lowered her massive head slightly, studying the way the baby dragons clung not in captivity, but in trust. No rope bound them. No cage enclosed them. The humans' hands remained open and steady. "They sought warmth," Elias continued, "not just from fire." The words lingered. For weeks, Hearthspire had burned with suspicion. Patrols circled endlessly. Conversations had grown sharp and guarded. Parents had wrapped wings tightly around their young, not noticing that protection had begun to feel like confinement. The matriarch stepped forward. The ground trembled beneath her weight. Elias did not retreat. One by one, the hatchlings looked toward her. None moved. The realization settled slowly over the gathered dragons like cooling ash. Their children had not been stolen. They had escaped an atmosphere suffocating them. The matriarch exhaled, and this time the sound was not anger, but something closer to regret. "We will not harm you," she said at last, her voice quieter. "I know," Elias answered, but the hatchlings did not loosen their grip. And for the first time in generations, the dragons of Hearthspire stood uncertain, not of their strength, but of their understanding. The streets outside Elias's barbershop had emptied, save for the soft drizzle that fell in silvery sheets, making cobblestones gleam like wet glass. The baby dragons remained wrapped around him, their tiny bodies warm and supple against his chest and shoulders. He walked slowly, careful not to jostle them, toward the small courtyard behind the shop. The dragons outside, still massive and imposing, had not advanced. Instead, they lingered, wings folded, eyes wary, as though waiting to see what the human would do. Elias could feel the heat of their judgment, a quiet pressure that made the air between them almost tangible. yet not a hint of hostility emerged. He had spent years learning patience, listening to both human and dragon clients, and now that skill was being tested in a way unlike anything before. Once in the courtyard, he gently set the crimson hatchling down on the stone tiles. It blinked sleepily, stretched its wings, and gave a tentative trill, glancing back at him as if seeking permission. The frost-colored dragon clambered onto a low bench, nestling into a corner while the silver-scaled one hopped lightly to perch on the edge of a fountain that had long since dried but whose stonework reflected the first hints of morning light. Even the smallest, who had nestled near his collarbone, now climbed gingerly to his shoulder. Elias exhaled, finally letting himself move freely. For weeks, he had wondered what had drawn them here. Now the answer was clear: safety, warmth, and trust. The matriarch of the dragon elders moved closer, wings brushing the drizzle with a sound like distant thunder. Her scales shimmered wet in hues of bronze and molten gold, and her gaze softened as she studied the hatchlings. "They have chosen you," she said, voice heavy with astonishment. "No human has ever been trusted in such a way by dragon younglings." "Why?" Elias straightened, looking her directly in the eye. "I did nothing remarkable," he said calmly. "I kept my hands still. I offered warmth. I did not threaten. I listened. That is all. That, and I never assumed control over them." A ripple of murmurs passed through the dragons surrounding them. One elder, dark as obsidian with streaks of silver along his horns, growled softly. "Do you not see the implications? To trust a human is dangerous. The world beyond this city will see weakness, and prey will exploit it." "I see it differently," Elias replied, his voice steady. "The hatchlings saw safety, not dominance. You assume control is strength, but sometimes it is restraint that teaches survival. They will return to you because they trust that you will protect them, not because you force them to obey." The matriarch lowered her massive head even closer, nostrils flaring as she inhaled the scent of the hatchlings mingled with Elias's own human warmth. "And yet, they stayed with you," she murmured almost to herself. "Through storms, through threats, through nights without light. They stayed." "They did," Elias said, "because I offered what they could not find elsewhere. Quiet, consistency, and care. They do not need fire to guide them. They need safety." A hush fell over the courtyard as the realization settled in. Dragons who had lived for centuries, who had trained entire generations in the art of fear and dominance, began to comprehend the radical notion that protection did not always require strength displayed through intimidation. One by one, their wings shifted, folding in patterns that softened their presence rather than amplifying it. The matriarch's eyes glimmered faintly, a slow acknowledgement that perhaps tradition had overlooked a fundamental truth. Trust could be earned without threat. Elias knelt slowly, allowing the hatchlings to climb freely if they wished. The crimson one hopped onto his knee, the silver one nuzzled his hand, and the smallest pressed against his neck again. They were no longer tentative. They were comfortable, and that comfort spoke volumes. The elder dragons observed this silent communion, noting how no fire flared, no claws were unsheathed, no wings beat aggressively. Only mutual acknowledgement existed. Finally, the matriarch spoke again, her voice more measured, almost reverent. "You have shown what we have forgotten, that even the smallest among us require guidance that does not burn, that they may choose refuge willingly, and that humans may offer what dragons cannot always see in themselves." Elias nodded once. "They came to me because they were frightened, not lost. They needed someone to simply be present, not control them. That is all any child ever needs, whether dragon or human." For the first time that morning, the elders seemed unsettled, but in a quiet, reflective way. The hatchlings chirped softly, wings stretching, claws flexing, completely unafraid. Elias could feel their trust radiating through him, a warmth stronger than the embers in his shop's hearth. The matriarch exhaled a deep rumble, one that carried centuries of expectation and authority, but now threaded with curiosity. "Perhaps there is wisdom in humility," she said. Elias smiled faintly, brushing a small hand along the silver hatchling's smooth scales. Sometimes courage is quiet, he said. Sometimes it is simply being steady, even when the world shakes around you. And in that courtyard, with drizzle glistening on stone and scales, a new understanding began to form, one not dictated by fire or fear, but by patience, care, and trust. The hatchlings had found a haven not through dominance, but through quiet guardianship. And the elders, for the first time, saw that strength could take many shapes, even in the hands of a single human barber. The sun had climbed higher, scattering droplets of rain across the rooftops of Hearthspire, when the courtyard finally stilled. The hatchlings, fully awake now, chirped softly and flexed their wings, testing strength gained from weeks of clandestine exploration. Elias had settled onto a low stone bench, allowing the smallest to curl in the crook of his arm, while the others explored the immediate area, occasionally glancing back to ensure he remained near. The matriarch and the gathered elders watched silently, their massive forms forming a protective arc that simultaneously intimidated and reassured. The tension of the past weeks had not vanished entirely, but it had softened, replaced by a cautious curiosity. One of the elder dragons, scales burnished bronze and eyes sharp as cut gems, stepped forward. "Human," he said, voice low yet carrying authority. "You have demonstrated a patience and steadiness we did not expect. The hatchlings trust you. Explain how." Elias considered this, aware that his words would carry more weight than any gesture. "I did not force them," he replied evenly. "I offered warmth, I remained calm, and I listened. That is all. They came to me because they felt safe, not because I commanded it nor because I sought glory. Safety, patience, and care are often underestimated, yet they are what even the strongest rely upon without realizing it." The matriarch lowered her head, letting her breath drift like smoke over the cobblestones. "Then it is true," she murmured, almost to herself. "Our children, our future, has sought refuge not from dragons, but from a human." Her eyes, normally sharp and unyielding, softened with contemplation. Elias nodded, feeling the weight of history pressing against the present. He had not sought recognition. He had not acted out of pride. Yet in these moments, he realized that simple human steadfastness had bridged a gap that centuries of fire and scale could not. A younger dragon shifted behind the elders, curiosity overtaking caution. "If the hatchlings have chosen to trust a human, what does it say of us?" It was not a challenge but a genuine question. The matriarch's gaze swept over him, then toward Elias. "It says that care can be stronger than flame, and patience can shape courage more effectively than intimidation. Observe carefully, for this lesson is older than either of you." The courtyard seemed to breathe with her words. The hatchlings chirped in soft agreement, and Elias could feel their calm settling through him like a warm tide. As the elders conferred among themselves, a realization began to ripple through the group. Weeks of worry, patrols, and assumptions had blinded them to a truth as simple as it was profound. The younglings had needed more than protection from predators. They had needed refuge from fear itself. Elias extended a hand to the nearest hatchling, who climbed willingly into his palm, wings stretching in comfort. The matriarch inclined her massive head slightly, a gesture of acknowledgement that words could not capture. "Then we shall allow it," she said, voice resonating through the courtyard. "Not as concession, but as recognition. Their choice shall not be overturned, and your presence shall not be challenged." Elias felt a subtle thrill, not of pride, but of relief. He had not sought to claim the hatchlings, only to provide a safe haven, yet that act of quiet courage had reshaped perceptions. The courtyard, once tense and filled with suspicion, now buzzed with a calm energy. The hatchlings began exploring further, flitting onto ledges, stretching wings, chirping in soft contentment, yet always returning to Elias when fatigue tugged at them. Even the elders had relaxed slightly, tails coiling carefully rather than lashing, wings folding rather than bracing for conflict. By afternoon, the news had spread through Hearthspire. Word of the hatchlings' trust in a human barber reached the city gates and beyond. Observers from distant districts arrived cautiously, drawn by curiosity rather than aggression. Elias welcomed them quietly, showing how the hatchlings responded to gentle care rather than fear. Visitors, both dragon and human, witnessed how patience could command respect, how calm assurance could inspire loyalty stronger than fire or authority. And so, the barber shop became more than a place for trimming hair and scales. It became a sanctuary, a testament to the quiet power of empathy. Hatchlings slept peacefully on warm laps and soft benches. Elders watched, learning anew the lessons their years had overlooked. Humans and dragons alike found common ground in the simplest of truths: that trust, once earned, cannot be forced, and care offered without expectation can reshape even the oldest of hierarchies. When Elias finally stepped outside into the evening light, the hatchlings trailing him in small clusters, he realized that Hearthspire had changed. Not through fire, not through battle, not through dominance or decree, but through quiet courage, steady hands, and an open heart. And the baby dragons, once lost to weeks of mystery, had discovered something far greater than safety. They had discovered trust. And through that trust, an entire city began to see a future that could be gentler, stronger, and more united than it had ever imagined.